So we'll move on to your next one.
Number 5 is currently in the rules, there is a mechanism where members may remove items from the local and consent calendar. Of course, we know the local and consent calendar is more for substantive issues, and if something is not local or there's not consent, there's a mechanism where 5 members can sign a page to remove that from the local and consent calendar, and it may have to go through the regular calendar to come back to the floor. You can also speak against it for a certain period of time. Now, congratulatory memorial resolution calendars typically and almost invariably are non-controversial, passed unanimously, but sometimes, and this has happened in the last 2 sessions a handful of times, and on either side where one large group of members might feel uncomfortable with a particular resolution, or on another resolution, another group of members might feel uncomfortable with it. And the only way that you can actually functionally register opposition in a meaningful way to a resolution would be to vote against the entire calendar, which no one wants to do because we want to pass all the good memorial and congratulatory resolutions. So what this provision does is puts in place a rule that if 20 or more members that are present on the floor have an objection to the inclusion of a resolution on the congratulatory resolution calendar, they can object to it, and it'll just be handled just like any other objected to local and consent bill, go to the regular calendar committee and come back for a floor vote, which would be a record vote. And so the reason 20 was chosen is because congratulatory and memorial calendars are typically non-controversial. They're not local and consent bills, not making substantive law. So we wanted to raise that threshold for members to remove it, but to give some type of threshold. So that 20 can probably be modified, but the general principle was to have a mechanism. Happy to answer any questions.
Members, any questions? Ms. Weiner?
Thank you, Chairman. Representative Vasut, we've both seen some fights over the local consent calendars and bills being knocked off and other bills being held hostage in retaliation and negotiations with that have sometimes burned down the floor for hours. Are you concerned about that same dynamic appearing on the congratulatory and memorial calendar?
If you had the threshold very low, you could have that. I think the higher the threshold is, the less likely that is to occur. Whether 20 is a magic number for that, or whether the threshold needs to be 30, 40, 50, I don't know. That's certainly something to bear in mind as a concern. And I think that if you believe that concern is likely to occur, then the solution would be to raise the threshold. But I would say that the solution is not to have no mechanism at all to remove something off the calendar, because then you're putting people into a tense situation where they have to kill the entire calendar, and we don't want to do that. And so I would just propose that, depending on your view on that subject, consider what the threshold is.
Okay, I'm not sure we agree on that. I mean, I think the other thing I want to flag is, you said your concern was that people couldn't functionally vote against these. But as I read your proposal, it's not providing a means for these to be voted on. It's referring them to the calendars committee, where I think a lot of us can assume if it's controversial, probably most of those are going to die. Getting things out of the calendars committee is pretty hard.
Not necessarily. So there have been a handful of resolutions, I believe, last session. I can remember us voting on 1 or 2. Don't quote me on this, but I thought there was something about changing one of the designations, whether it was like a state rodeo or something like that. I don't know, where somebody was moving a town on it or something like that. But there have been resolutions that have come to the floor on floor votes. Right now you can register an opposition to a resolution on the journal, but it has no effect on its passage, if that may be right. And it doesn't function as an actual vote, unlike a local and consent vote does. And so I think that there is an avenue for the calendars committee to be able to bring a resolution to the floor, which then would have the record vote where members could actually vote. If they really did not like that resolution, if a majority did not, then it wouldn't pass.
Okay, I think we see this differently, but thank you.
No worries.
Mr. Moody?
You set this threshold at 20?
Yes.
So if I want to congratulate someone back home in El Paso who is an advocate for things that maybe you don't politically agree with, or think that maybe it's not something that should be congratulated, and you find 19 friends, I would be able to be prohibited from going through the avenue that other members go through, even though I might disagree with maybe the politics of someone that is being congratulated in their district. 20 members. You spent a lot of time earlier today talking about the majority. This rule says 20 members get to tell everybody else in the Texas House who deserves to have a memorial resolution or a congratulatory resolution. If you want to talk about thresholds, that threshold is insulting to everybody else who does the hard work around the state in their districts to cultivate those relationships, to let those people know that they're seen, that we appreciate their work, that we're glad that they accomplished whatever it is that we're trying to seek to congratulate them for. Injecting politics into the congratulatory and memorial calendar is a fast track to the continued dissolution of the ability of our members to work together. You are injecting politics into a space where it's never existed before. There are plenty of people in districts across the state that I probably don't want to congratulate or wouldn't want to pat them on the back for whatever they did. But that's okay, because you do, and you're proud of them in your district. And I've never taken my name off one thing, not one thing that's come through that calendar. And there are plenty of people all over the GOP that we've congratulated and we love, and they've done great things. Maybe don't fit with the way I see the world. Never taken my name off one of them, because that's your right to do that. And you want 20 members to be able to tell every single member of the Texas House that they don't have the right to represent their constituents that way? It is insulting.
I disagree with your comments. I think that members, and to be fair, of both parties have injected a degree of politics into some resolutions recently. And were both sides this past session ran into an issue of that nature. Now, some of those were handled by reaching out to the author and saying, can you withdraw this resolution? And the member did. And generally, that's how we want it to work, is we want our members to reach out to each other, to address those issues as they come up, and member to member. And that, I think, would be the preferred route to do it. The problem is there is not a functional mechanism in the rule that would allow, if a resolution of a particular substance, and you and I would probably fairly disagree on maybe a particular issue, but maybe we agree on one that is particularly problematic. Maybe we got some member that snuck a resolution through. The only mechanism in place to get that resolution off the calendar, because it doesn't belong there, it's maybe a policy statement that we all agree politics should play no role in the congratulatory memorial calendar. There's no mechanism to remove that other than to ask that member if they will kindly withdraw their resolution. Some of them do, but there's no guarantee of that. And so if we all thought that there was a particular political statement, maybe 149 of us agreed should not be made, that resolution is still going to pass, be signed by the speaker, and be a resolution of the House, unless we were to vote against the entire calendar, all of the non-political statements. And so I don't submit to you that 20 is an absolute. I don't submit to you that even this is an absolute. I submit to you simply this: there must be and should be a mechanism in the rules to remove a politically objectionable of a sufficient degree, a heightened degree, from the calendar without having to kill the whole calendar. And what that looks like, I leave it to those in the rules to come up with the body to come up with. But I would just submit to you that there should be some mechanism, some relief valve that can be used.
Well, I'll give you one example, because setting it up like this is then 20 people are going to decide what the threshold is for what's too controversial. A colleague of mine from El Paso just wanted to congratulate a former police officer who infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan. There was a movie made about his life, and a lot to be celebrated. But he was also someone that was very outspoken politically. And that was something that my colleague was approached about. So a police officer who did amazing work to infiltrate a hate group and did wonderful work, has controversial political stances, and we don't get to give him the pat on the back that he deserves because they're celebrating his life in film. That's the kind of conversations we get into. So when you open this door, just know that that never stops. It'll
Sure.
be, it will be a continued slide into bickering and back and forth over stuff that we should just be able to do and support one another. That we should be writing into these rules things that enforce collegiality and working together and consensus building, not things that give opportunity for more strife and more fights and more disagreements. I've been in a million disagreements. They're fine. It's part of this process. Not afraid of them. Mm-hmm. But the rules are meant to show what our institution stands for. This proposal stands to pit us against each other instead of trying to figure out how to celebrate with one another accomplishments that I may not recognize that are happening in your district, or that you may not recognize that are happening in my district. Build your rules to build collegiality, to build the opportunity to work together, not to divide us further. That's what I'd ask you to do. Thank you.
I do agree 100% with that sentiment. And I would say that simply this idea was to provide a relief valve for what would otherwise be, according to the norms, an improper resolution to be able to be removed if the author was not willing to do so. That hasn't reached a threshold, but it came very close last session, and we saw it firsthand. I would just encourage all members, just don't submit overtly political resolutions. Continue like it has been in the past. And but to your point, I think if you were going to have a rule and you felt strongly that a 20 threshold was to make it 76 or make it 75, I think that might address that.
Representative Zwiner.
Yeah, Representative Vasut, I'm sorry, I just have to push back at the idea that all of these were overtly political, because one of the ones was a memorial resolution for a well-known advocate, well-known enough to be, and it was still targeted. So please do not pretend that this is only going to be used for things that are crossing a line and more political than what should be used, because people went after a memorial resolution last session. Thank you.
I understand.
Members, any other questions?